What's up? Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Ari Temkin. The guy sitting next to me, one of these directions, is Geoff Ketchum. And welcome back to the Texas Longhorns Orange Bloods YouTube channel. We're really pleased to have you with us. And, now that we know officially there's going to be no CFP expansion before 2026, what does that mean for the exit for Texas and Oklahoma from the Big 12? Much of the news surrounding the move for Texas has subsided pretty substantially, I'd say, really since August. There's been bursts here or there, but Ketch, what's kind of the latest that you've heard on this front?
Well, I think that one of the things that's changed, it's all football related, really and truly, and financially related. I think you've got a Texas football program that 12 months ago felt like, get us in the SEC and let's go get them. And I think the reality of last season has put Steve Sarkisian in a place where he's letting his advisors go. Like, that's a bad move for the University of Texas football program right now to rush into the SEC. So you've got a situation where they could start as soon as 2025. And I don't know that there's a current race to get out in front of that. I think we know that it's not going to be 2023. I think it would be a big surprise. And I think there's been much more of a Oklahoma financially prefers to wait so that they're not paying out of pocket to make this thing happen.
They don't have the same money that Texas has.
If Texas felt like it was ready to go to the SEC, I think Texas would be very aggressive about getting this started. What they don't want to do is put themselves into a position where they have to fire their coach because they get off to a bad start in the SEC and leave themselves into a position where they really like their coach and they really think that he in enough time can have this program SEC ready, but there would be a feeling of sacrificing the coach to the college football gods, very angry college football gods, if a 5-7 team from 2021 in the Big 12 is asked to tackle a more physical, a bigger, larger program. So I think Texas may going to play this thing by ear a little bit. I think that 2024 is not impossible, but I think that they'll wait to see how good they feel about the direction of the program. They just don't want to embarrass themselves. And I think they feel like there is a much bigger risk of damaging the brand of the program and going too soon than the little bit of egg on the face that comes with not quite getting out of this deal as soon, because when you mentioned August, in August, you couldn't convince Texas fans that it would take this long.
Right.
And I just think that in the 8, 9, 10 months that have followed, we've seen a situation where Texas coaches, administrators, everybody involved realizes there better be a real planned and orchestrated attack on this. If we go willy-nilly, we might not recover from it in a way that we're hoping for a more smoother transition. And I think they've got to make progress on the football field before they can really start thinking about making that progress. It just is what it is.
If we had the playoff expansion immediately, do you think this is a different discussion? Like, do you think that this discussion is also skewed by now a delay in the playoff? And so what that means is it's the same as it's always been?
Not really. It's more selfish than that. I mean, it really is about Oklahoma provides really convenient cover and that they're just not financially situated in a way where Texas is. So they don't want to go separately. They do want to arrive in the same year. It will look very junky. And I don't think the SEC wants to dabble in one comes one year and are we what do we do with the pod? I think they're building a plan that includes those two together. And I think doing it separately makes it tricky. Everybody on the Oklahoma side seems to think they're going to want to need to run out the term of the contract. I just think that from the Texas side, they'd be aggressive if they felt like it benefited Texas. There's a direct correlation between waiting and what happened on the field last year. And Texas is going to wait before they get aggressive.
Yeah.
So they get to tell kids in recruiting, we are headed to the SEC. it's an advantage for Texas right now to be very gray area about it because you're not telling any lies.
Right. No, that's a good point. I wonder, is it bad for Texas and Oklahoma to be in this conference with BYU, Cincinnati, Houston? Because that's when I think about the idea of this team being in this conference until 2024, one of the biggest things I think of is that, that means they're going to be in this conference with these new members. That can't be good.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's some Hatfields and McCoy type stuff that goes on in this conference, and it's going to be a bit weird. I mean, it'll be a bit weird playing a couple of those games if needed. The Big 12 hasn't really announced what they're going to do. And what does it look like if Texas, and I think the Big 12 is in a position where there has been some conversation about what divisions would look like in the Big 12 with added teams. And it might mean splitting Texas and Oklahoma up and not having them in the same division, which has never been done before. Like, I think that all things are on the table, and I don't know that Texas and Oklahoma's comfort in any of these things, or, for so long, what they've desired drives the meeting tone. The entire game plan for the Big 12 has historically centered around how do we make Texas and Oklahoma happy. That's not their concern anymore. And
now it's the opposite.
Well,
how do we piss them off?
I think there'll be much more. Look, the Big 12 is safe, which when all this happened in August last year, there was a sense of like who's hanging in the wind. But I think that a lot of people in the Big 12 probably feel better. I think some of the schools in the Big 12 might like this setup better because they're safe, and now they don't have to bow down to one or two schools. There's not a big dog in the Big 12. There's not really a big dog left. So it makes it a bit of, it is like conference socialism. Like, everybody's going to really have an equal amount of money. The rules will be the same for all of them. And it won't be like, well, there's one or two people that get treated differently. They're the rich people. So I think I just think it comes down to the Big 12 will be in a position to say, we're not trying to screw you guys. We're doing what we think is best for us. And maybe for whatever reasons are their own, they would say, does it make sense for us to have you guys in the same division? And then the very next year, switch everything around. It screws up scheduling and a couple of other things. So it may have to be a certain way. And again, this new certain way for a couple of years may not necessarily be to the optimal benefit that the University of Texas would have in the next few years. But I think it's a means to an end. And I think now they realize, one of their problems is they were so ready to announce this thing that they did so without having the plan mapped out.
Right.
And it looks Mickey Mouse for a million reasons.
They probably felt a little bit better on having a case that their lawyers could bring forward that would say like, oh, we can get out doing this. And I think ultimately what happened was they were like, yeah, their lawyers did a really good job with this, and we can't get out of this. We're gonna have to pay this. And
all that fine print turned out to be real.
Right. And here's what I wonder, because I completely agree with you. If you go to the SEC unprepared, that is not going to go well. And I think this recruiting class is like, this is a SEC level recruiting class. Now it's about these kids being developed and this class coming to fruition and being great players up front, especially on both sides of the football. But I get the point on the detrimental part of joining the SEC too early, but I also think there's a detriment in waiting around the Big 12 too long. I don't want to be in the Big 12 if I'm Texas with Houston. I don't want another, like, I'm Texas, you're Houston. Like, TCU and Baylor below me, but we're below me. But at this point, Houston's like 3 or 4 rungs below it. So it's like there's the recruiting part of that with Houston. Not to say you're going to be recruiting with Houston or against Houston, but it's just like that just doesn't seem to take. And I don't know. I feel like there are other elements of this that say like it's a major detriment to this program just continue to be in this conference beyond a certain. So there's like a balance here where it's like, you don't want to join the SEC too early, but you also don't want to stick around the Big 12 too long. And I do wonder the SEC's point of view, because if I'm Texas, I might not wait around for Oklahoma, and I get it, but I'm worried about me. I'm not worried about me and you. I'm worried about me. And
but you know what? I don't know that Texas has the stroke to come in, like,
swinging their big stick.
Yeah, and like telling the SEC how it's going to go. We're going to let you know when we want. Like, that's not how this ended up happening.
Right.
This ended up happening where SEC had a lot of leverage.
It's a humbling thing for a program that's run a conference for, 2 decades.
Exactly. I mean, they've run the Big 12 since the inception of the Big 12. When you think about the way it handled Prop 48 kids and cut schools like Nebraska and Kansas State off at the knees by saying, no, we're going to treat Prop 48 kids. For those that don't know what Prop 48 kids are, back in the day, if you didn't qualify academically, you could be handled a certain way. Like, you didn't play as a true freshman. Like, you lost
a path to eligibility.
Yeah. You had a path to eligibility that included being on campus. And Texas was like, no, we're not going to be involved with people who are essentially taking non-collegiate, like, scholarship academic people and letting them into schools. Texas viewed itself as a Cal, and they are, like, they're one of the more prestigious public universities in the world. It's like one of my great claims to fame. I don't know, I didn't graduate from Texas, but I got in, and it's a really good school. It's not like getting into some schools where it's like, oh, well, I'm in state, so like they let me in. So like, I think that it's a different time. They dictated the terms of the Big 12 every step of the way. That won't happen with the SEC. And I think if the SEC says, well, no matter how this happens, you guys need to come as a pair, I think you'll find that Texas and Oklahoma end up taking the path of the least amount of friction.
Do you think, though, that there is a detriment to being in this conference too long? Like, are there diminishing returns of being in this conference in 2024?
Is Texas good or is it not good in the context of this question being asked? Because no, it doesn't benefit them to be mediocre and be in a conference. It's will be viewed as, I don't know. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma in a Big 12 with actually 12 teams, and they're not terrible. The conference, I think, will have a little extra juice, and it will be harder for them to win as a consequence. But I think that, no, the time frame we're talking about is so small that we're going to go from Texas telling recruits they're going to be in the SEC, but not knowing when. In 2025, at like worst case scenario, will legitimately be here before we know it.
There is an exasperation, though, too. Like the video you guys made after the Texas Tech loss, it was like, like, screw these guys. Like, they, you know what I mean? Like, that's going to happen like in football again for, you run through Tech and Baylor and all the in-state schools, and then you add Houston to the mix. It's like that anger and vitriol from football and then basketball. Like, that's just going to get that till 2024.
Look, you and I are married, and you and I think, are both happily married. Like, we've survived, like the period of time that is supposed to be
the rocky part.
So like, you and I can talk about divorce in a way where it's hard. We don't know because we haven't been divorced. Right. But like, I watched Marriage Story, and like,
marriage is tough. Marriage is tough.
Like, and divorce is tough.
Yeah.
And this is a world where Texas and Oklahoma divorcing itself from the Big 12. Like, lawyers have to be hired. And you know what? All of that stuff that you don't like about each other comes to a head, and there are children to think about, and there's money. And like, so there's not a divorce in the world. Right. Where when there are things that have to be split up and we have to determine huge sums of money, it's hard. And what Texas did, Texas acted like that divorce dude who realizes he's getting divorced, right? So it's like, I did it. I'm not going to be married to this woman ever again. And it's like, let's go party. And he's like, let's get all my now married friends. And they're all like, man, I can't go out and go clubbing with you.
Right.
He's like, no, let's go party. Let's go drink it up. I'm getting a divorce. And he does that. And then for months, it gets painful. He's like, oh, I actually have to now get divorced. It's not like
it's Michael not just Scott. A party.
It's not Michael Scott in The Office declaring bankruptcy. It's not, you don't get to just come out and say, I am leaving. And then it's like, so I left. I'm officially no, you don't get to just say you're leaving. And then it's like, what are you guys upset about? I just told you I left. Yeah. Well, no, that's not how any of this works. So I think that the reality is Texas fans for the next couple of years are going to have to live with the knowledge that this is all complicated, financially speaking, and that not every university wants to just set its money on fire. That plays at Texas sets money on fire all the time. And I do think there are some board of regents that are like, 80 million? We can make like 80 million. We can just sell some shit. We'll just
right.
We'll
just like call stuff. 3 guys. Like literally, if you're Texas, you have infinite amount of dollars because you just call like 3 boosters and it's like, yeah, 80 million. We got that in a hurry. Yeah.
Well, and they have, they've got what do you call it when schools have just billions in the coffins and like
what oh my God. This
is why I didn't graduate from Texas. Little things like remembering words. But yeah, the endowments. They've got endowments. That, billions of dollars. And like, they've got money. They don't even have to ask people for money.
Yeah.
They can pay out what they needed to pay out if they were like, this is what we need to do. The need part for Texas centers around this football program. And it's really hard to talk about what this program needs when they don't know.
Yeah.
What they do know is that coming off of last year, the last thing they need in 2023 is the SEC, or excuse me, in 2022. Like, they know they're not ready. How much readier they are is something that they can't gauge right now. So, the one thing they've got on their side is time. They can still play 2024 without having to rush to a decision in 2022. But boy, they're not going to put this thing on the front foot unless they know they're not setting Steve Sarkisian up to get fired. And Steve Sarkisian's not going to tell them, yo, let's do this now.
Right.
If he thinks I might lose my job if we screw this thing up, because the elephant in the room will be Texas can ill afford to not have some buzz when it enters the SEC, which means they can't be mediocre going in. They have to be above average. Otherwise, they lose that wave of momentum that comes with it once they're, in theory, just a mediocre run-of-the-mill SEC team. There are lots of those. Then you're potentially
just like everybody else.
But even Georgia was just kind of Georgia for a long time. And they're a historically proud program. I mean, there are a lot of programs that, being better, you have to be top 3 in the country to win the SEC every year. So there's never an accidental win for the most part. It's not like someone accidentally won the SEC. And the Big 12, Baylor kind of accidentally won the Big 12.
Right. You're exactly right. Nobody's accidentally winning the SEC.
You have to be better than Georgia and better than Bama.
Yeah.
They're going to get 2 teams in to the playoff every year. And Texas was in a situation where even just last year, they went 5-7 in a conference where the top 3 teams in the preseason all failed to make the Big 12 championship game. It was Oklahoma, Iowa State, and Texas were the top 3 going into last year. And none of those teams even qualified for the Big 12 championship game. And, that doesn't happen in the SEC. Alabama doesn't have a bad year. Their bad years are like 11-1. 11-1 is literally. And so Texas knows that, just to wrap this thing up, Texas knows that they have to come correct. And the thing is, they're not correct right now. They can talk about recruiting. They can talk about the freshmen that they have coming in. But when they played Arkansas last year, Arkansas beat their head in. And Arkansas is just a pretty good little SEC team.
Right.
Nobody in the SEC is like, oh, God, Arkansas is on. Like, there's a bunch of Arkansas out there. They do big size. All those teams have been having to compete in that conference. It's the advantage that A&M really has over Texas is they've almost spent a decade in that conference now. And it's taken a long time for them to figure out, shit, man, we need a lot of big dudes. And like they've been collecting them class after class after class. Texas really, they got one class. Yeah. It would actually behoove them to wait until 2024, 2025, so that you've got a stack of 2 or 3 or 4 classes that you've now combined that's ready for that type of football. One class of freshmen ain't it. And really, that's all Texas has right now. I mean, it is.
Right.
And what makes SEC teams is they recruit big guys every year by the bucket loads. And Texas, Texas, I think it's smart. The last thing actually I'll really say is I think the best thing you can say about the Texas administration is they seem to know who they are.
Yes. Yep.
And what needs to happen. So there's no real myopic, like we're going to take on the world. Everybody seems there's the reason why we're not hearing anything right now is there's no answer. And they've decided, look, time's kind of on our side. We're not going to make a fool out of ourselves either way. They kind of just keep their mouth shut. And when they have a little bit more of a sample size, it allows them to know who they are as a football program. I think you'll hear something more definitive. Not until then.
Yeah. And look, at the end of the day, today, 2025 might seem like, wow, that's a long time away, but it's nothing. It's really nothing. And to spend all this money for the future earnings, as opposed to just waiting it out and getting those earnings without any of that blowback and being, stacking good classes on top of good classes. Because I do think that this does help you recruit. No, you're exactly right. That's GK, Geoff Ketchum. I'm Ari Temkin. If you like what you're watching, make sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. That way other people can find it as well. But for now, we're out. Peace.
Later.